Well, I finally got a great deal on a Suzuki KingQuad 300. I've wanted one of these for a long time because it is the best ATV ever made. Let me show you why it's the best. Apparently it doesn't like to start when cold. You may have to fix that. Got the carburetor apart here. It actually looked surprisingly clean inside. I really didn't see anything major. The bottom of the bowl was like, there's like one little tiny lump, and it really wasn't bad. I've seen way worse. One thing I did notice is that there is an idle screw adjustment. That's supposed to be on a flexible cable that comes out here, and that was broken off. The other thing I noticed that was obviously wrong is this is the mount for the fuel enrichment cable for starting it up in place of a choke. That's broken. All the jets looked fine. I didn't see any clogs. Everything looked okay. Then I put it all back together, and it worked about the same. Now I needed a couple pieces, that broken plastic piece. I needed an idle screw adjustment, and I went to go buy them. And when I was looking up the prices, I found an entire brand new carburetor for about the same price as those pieces, actually slightly cheaper. So I think it was 39 bucks for a complete carburetor. It had the parts I needed on it. So I went and bought that. It doesn't work either. So I still can't start it cold, and this carburetor is different. I can't hook up the throttle. There's some issues. Okay, I got my two carburetors here. This is the original one, mostly. This is the new one. I'm going to use the original one. I'm just going to steal parts off this one, dump them on there. I've already got most of it done. I took out the slide. This is my old slide. You can actually see, if you can see it from there, but there's a groove where that's actually worn. So the new one that's in here now should be much better at sealing. I also grabbed the broken throttle adjusting screw, replaced that. And let's see, oh, and then the little cap for the fuel enrichment thing, I gotta put the good one on there. Now, the reason I'm not using this brand new one is it actually is wrong. Even though it's supposed to be exactly for this application, you can see right here, this one has a vacuum line here and here. One is for the fuel pump, one is for the fuel shutoff. This only has one pointing the wrong way. So I'd have to redo lines, add T's, all that. It can be done, but this one has it already set up right. Also, you go over to the throttle itself, and this one has a smooth bore where the throttle cable sticks in. This one is threaded, so the throttle cable doesn't fit. Now I could go and drill that out also and make it work, but I'm just going to take the parts I need for this one from this. So swap over the good parts from this one, put them on that one, and go back to the original carburetor. So at this point, I've pretty much torn a lot of this apart, haven't actually found my problem, and it still won't start when it's cold. But I was scrolling around the internet, and I came across someone who had one of these that said they had a similar problem caused by the intake valve hanging open. There's a real tight clearance, 1 to 3 thou, called out for the intake valve, and apparently if it closes up the gap, it'll well, if it holds the intake valve open, you run low on compression. So, we're going there next. Now I can't actually get a feeler gauge in here. I'm just going to wiggle it and see if I feel any movement at all. I don't feel any movement at all in this intake valve. I think that's holding the valve open. So let's get some lash in there and see what that does. That may very well have been it. It took me a full quarter turn before the pressure on the intake valve came off the rocker. So it was being held open. Now that I back this off a quarter turn, there's just a little bit of play in there. Probably can't see it. I can't measure it, but we're gonna call it good. We're gonna try it and see what happens. Got the carb in, already got some gas in it. Now I got everything else buttoned up, air filter, manifold, all that. So we're gonna see what happens. Try some choke. sounds pretty good. Now I've got to put together everything I took apart to get to that. And the front plastic and the front rack, and we'll see in about an hour of reassembly. Hopefully I kept the bolts in the same spot. Well, now that it's running again, let's take a look at this quad. It's a 1990s Suzuki KingQuad. And one of the big things that makes this the best quad ever made are two levers right here. This right here is a range selector. You have high, you have low, and super low. That's important. And here you have two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, and four-wheel drive with the differential locked. So that means you have a gear from every occasion. For example, two-wheel drive is fantastic when you have a project that's not quite working right and you need a quick donut break. One other important feature of the two-wheel drive setting is the steering. It's really easy in two-wheel drive. A lot of quads that are four-wheel drive all the time, the steering is stiff because you're turning the front wheels. This one's actually really easy to steer. Four-wheel drive will get you pretty much anywhere you need to go. It's got a lot of traction. You put it in super low range, it's got a lot of torque. Even that little 300cc motor can really push stuff. If you need to move a car around, that's the way to go. And then of course, there's high range. Now if you actually need to get somewhere and you have an open area, that's a good gear to get you moving. Now, this isn't unique to this ATV, but it has a handbrake and a hand throttle and steering all from this handle. And the thing that makes that interesting is you can drive with one hand without being on the vehicle. If you need to maneuver around, that can be really handy. So just having those gears makes this a great quad. If you ever have a dead battery, it's got you covered. Under the seat, there is a rope start. There is a compressor release on the head. You go ahead and hit the compressor release so it spins easy. And there you go. Now that could be handy and potentially get you out of a jam. This also has independent rear suspension, which when it first came out in the 80s was almost unheard of. And even in the 90s when this was built, it was still a fairly rare thing. But it needed to do that, because if you could see, that right there is actually the engine oil fill. The engine, the transmission, and the rear end all share the same oil. They're all in the same casing. It's all one solid unit with no flex at all. So they needed to have shafts coming off the transmission in order to have any kind of suspension. Now overall, this is a good example. As you can see, it runs now and runs consistently. And you can tell the previous owner took care of it. There's a few little plastic issues, but they did the proper repair, so those are basically as good as factory. The mud flaps are still mostly there. The tires hold air for at least a week at a time. One other good feature of this particular unit is this nice low tread style. By these tires being this worn, basically it saves the ground you're on because it doesn't dig holes as much. If you're in the lawn or something, you don't tear it up. The muffler has a unique spark arrestor shape for, you know, more power. The graphics give you a subtle stealth look. That way you don't really know what it is for sure. This sticker shows you that you don't really need to worry about warnings anymore. That's all gone now. I've also noticed that this has a torn boot. And that means the dirt is going to get into the grease in the CV joint and destroy that CV joint pretty quickly. Normally the go-to solution would be duct tape. But I don't find duct tape to be very effective because it doesn't adhere well, and as the joint flexes, the duct tape just all pulls off. So we're going to use self-adhering sports wrap. Now this stuff is pretty flexible, so I'll be able to wrap it around well. Always make sure you wrap in the direction that means it would tighten up as you drive forward, because you rarely drive backwards. Now I'm not going to be able to reattach this part, so what I'm going to try to do is wrap from here down to the shaft and back to basically seal that greased area. Now you can see this is just sort of feeding itself right in, making a completely new boot. Now we're going to go back and forth a little bit. Let's go back and wrap the outside a little. Oop. It's adhering to itself. Alright, now let's go back to here. And basically we're making a nice flexible cone shape. As you can see, got to get to the axle a little more. And you can pull the boot back and see your progress. See how we've got most of that greased area sealed up completely now? We'll do some straight at the axle and then come back around again. And you want to end up back at the beginning. There we go, all the way in. Alright, now I'm adding a zip tie just to make sure. Now this is where we started the wrap and ended it, so by zip tying here on the other side of the boot we should keep everything in place. Then we'll clip off this zip tie for a professional repair. Alright, zip tie snip off clean. We're basically done here. If you go in water, it'll go in there. I don't have to deal with water. For me, dust is the only issue, and this is a pretty good protection against dust. Someday I may actually replace this boot, maybe, but for now it's better than it was. Now that looks like a good spot for a campfire. I'm gonna have to remember this spot. And now I'm going to get back to hauling junk around. Until next time, keep having fun.